Welcome to the Programming with Codea podcast. Learn to program on the iPad for the iPad. My name is Patrick Coxell, and today what we're going to do is we're going to look at global variables. To begin with, we're just going to duplicate one of our previous solutions like we've been doing so that we don't have to start from scratch. And today is going to be lesson 10. If you remember from lesson 9a, we were using Scene Manager once again, and we had a splash screen. When you press the button, we had a different button, and we were actually using a table to hold several values together. I'm just going to go through and change the comment header. And today what we're going to do is we're actually going to remove that table, and we're going to create a couple global variables that we're going to be using. Before we start anything, I'm actually going to create yet another scene that we're going to be using. So I'm going to go over to the plus sign and I'm going to say create new class. And we're going to have another scene called the game over scene. And we'll just move that in order so that it makes sense for us. A reminder that the order is actually for people. It has nothing to do with the computer or the iPad. It doesn't care what order the files are at the top. So today what we're going to do is we're going to create some global variables. Just to review, every variable we've created so far has been a local variable. It's either been a local variable to a function, where in that function, maybe the draw function, it would be created probably 60 times a second. If the draw function is running smoothly, it would be created, used, and then at the end of the function, it would be destroyed or released so that that memory could be used again. Or we created a variable that is local to the file. So when that scene gets created, the variable gets created. It exists the entire time the scene is running. When we leave the scene, that variable gets released. These are the types of variables you should be using most of the time. Sometimes, in very special circumstances, you might want a variable that exists the entire time the program is running. Usually it's a bad idea to have variables, all your variables do that, but sometimes it might be useful. So we're just going to create a section for global variables. And we're going to actually create two. Up until now, when we've been creating local variables, we put the keyword local in front of them. When you're creating a global variable, you oddly enough don't use the keyword global, you actually just don't put any keyword in front of them. So I have a new variable called top score, and I'm just going to initialize it to nil. Nil is not the same as 0. 0 is a value. Nil means that it is empty, and those two are different. And I'm going to create another one called health points. So these are two types of variables that you might want to have exist the entire time the program runs. Health points is a variable that you would create when the program starts, and the value would probably decrease as you're playing. When the game ends, when you start over again, it should start back at its value. Ours is going to be 3. Top score, on the other hand, is slightly different. Once you reach the top score, that should be saved when the program closes so that the next time you start it up, it should be at the same value. So we're going to look at these two different cases. Under our setup function, since we created a new scene, we're going to reference our new scene. And we are going to call this end game. And make sure you use IntelliSense and make sure that you spell it exactly correctly so that it works properly. So this is our scenes. Just above scene, we're going to initialize the those two global variables that we just created. So top score is slightly different in that it needs to be saved. And there's a function built into Codea. There's two that we're going to be using. We're going to start with one called read local data. So what read local data does is it lets you read, obviously, from the app a piece of memory that actually gets saved even when the value gets closed, or when the program gets closed, the value gets written out. So when we first start up our program, we're going to read that value in. And you have to give it a key to reference in the values. So you can save more than one value. We're only going to say one, and we're going to have our key as being called high score. So that's what we're going to use to reference it. And the very first time you run the program, it can't read the value because the value doesn't exist, because we've never saved one yet, because it's the first time the program is run. So Codea lets you have a default value to begin with, and clearly the default value for top score should be 0 because at the very beginning we don't have a top score. Our other one is health points, and in my example we're going to start with a health point of 3. So that's all we're going to do in the main. Notice we declared our global variables at the very top of main outside of the setup function. Although you can declare global variables anywhere in your program, it's usually not a good idea to have them spread all over the place. It's nice programming style to put them right at the beginning so that people know that they are global variables and they exist through the entire program. In splash screen, we're actually just going to leave it. We're not going to touch it. We're not going to do anything. You press the button, you move to the next scene, and that's what we're going to do. In main scene, as I said, we're going to actually get rid of the table. We're not going to use tables this time. So I'm just going to go through and delete all the references that we created for tables. And we're actually going to create two buttons, and we're not going to call it moving back button. We're going to have two buttons called top score button and health points button, and those are going to be used for our two global variables. So these, hopefully you'll notice, are local variables, so they are local to this file. So top score button, I'm just going to take my one that I had previously and paste that in, just so that you don't have to see me write. I'm going to copy that. And just so that we can see the difference, I'm actually going to change this. There is a green circle button in the asset pack that we added, and instead of being at the exact same place, because then the buttons get stacked on top of each other, I'm just going to place the other one slightly below. So we're going to have two buttons, one on top of the other. Don't forget to have a draw method for each, and we're also going to have a touch event for each. So there's my draw. And there's my touch event. So we will have two buttons, one stacked on top of the other. At the moment they'll do nothing, but we're just going to check to make sure that the two buttons actually do show up. And they don't. I made a mistake on line 19. So let's go back to line 19. Oh, I put the bracket in the wrong location. That's why it's always good to test your code as you go along. There we go. That should be better. Let's test that again. There we go. So we have two buttons. The top one is going to be top score. That's why I put it there. And the bottom one is going to be health points. So what we're going to do next is for top score. Every time I touch that button, I would like to add 1 to top score. It's not really a very interesting game, but we'll give you the idea of how to do this. So as we've done in the past, we're going to put this in the touch event and we're going to ask the button a question. If top score button has been selected, then do something. We're going to add 1 to our global variable. So clearly that will be an if statement. If top score button dot selected is equal to true, then we need to do something. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our variable top score button and we're going to add 1 to it. So when we run our program now, you will notice nothing is happening because we don't have anything in draw. So there's two things we could do. We could print it to the console, especially since we do have the console window open, but just for something different, I'm going to print it out as a piece of text on the screen, because usually something like this would be printed out on the screen. So I'm just going to inform the user the top score is, and I'm going to place 2 dots, which if you remember is the concatenation symbol. And then I'll put the variable, so it'll say top score colon and then whatever the score is. And if you remember, the next thing you have to give it is an X and Y coordinate so that it knows where to actually put this text. So I'm just going to put it at 100, 100. And before we do anything else, since in main I had no fill set, it would be very prudent to set your fill to something before you draw your text so that it will actually show up. So I'm just going to say fill and pick a color, and I think I'm just going to pick white this time. So let's run our program and see what we have. So there we go. It now tells us our top score is 0, which makes perfect sense. And when we touch our button, oh, it didn't change it, because I was pressing the wrong button. It was the top one. There we go. As you press the top button, it increases. So that's good. You'll notice at the bottom of Codea, when we're running, the third button over is the do it again, the circular one. So if we rerun our program, you'll notice that top score goes back to 0. So we're reading it in, but we haven't saved the value. So after we actually add 1 to it, it would be really nice if we wrote the value back out to the computer, to the iPad, so that it could save that value. So we're going to do that next. So we're going to take our variable, there's a command called save local data, and much like read local data, save local data, you have to make sure you're using the exact same key, because this is what the iPad is using to keep track of it. And what value am I placing in there? Well, the value is our global variable top score. So every time we actually add 1 to it, right away we're going to save that so that it's actually saved. So let's see how this works now. So there's our splash screen. When we add 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm going to close the program completely. And just for good measure, I'm going to close out of here. And I'm going to go to lesson 10, open it back up, And we're going to rerun it. And you'll notice there it is. It actually saved our value from when we closed it to when we opened it back up. So that's a very good way of saving a value, not only as a global variable, but also from closing the program. So now we're going to deal with our other one, which is health points. And health points, when you press the button, it adds it, but it's not going to save it globally it's going to save it globally, but it's not going to save it from when we close the program. So if health points button dot selected is equal to true, then we need to do something. And in this case, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to subtract 1 from health points. So health points is assigned health points minus 1. So every time you press the button, it's going to go down, and obviously when our health points arrive at 0, something should happen. And what I want to happen is I want to go to the end game screen. So that's yet another if statement embedded inside of this. So if health points, just for consistency, instead of saying is equal to, it's always good programming style to say less than or equal to, just in case someone hits that button really quickly. So less than or equal to 0. If that's true, then we want to do something. And what we want to do is we want to go to the endgame scene. So scene dot change. And what scene are we going to? We're going to the endgame scene. So let's run this again. You'll notice once again our top score is once again at 5. Oh, we forgot to print out health points. So we're going to have to go back and print that out so that we can see what's going on. So our health points, and concatenate that with our variable, and then place it in a location, and I'm just going to place it above our other one. So there we go. As we expected, health point starts at 3, then it goes to 2, then it goes to 1, and when you press it once more, it changes and goes to our blank screen, because endgame we've written nothing. So that is how you actually use global variables and variables that you would like to save from one running of the game to the other. And that's all we're going to do today.